We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning.
Where I want to get started is I became interested in getting you on my show when we talked at the workshop that you set up in this area. And so most of my questions are kind of continuations of thoughts that I had from that workshop that I wrote down there. So before we get to those, however, could you talk about some different projects that you're currently involved with? And like I said, we met through CreatePA, so what is your involvement with that, I think, to start off?
Yeah, so I can give a brief background of who I am. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm Morgan Overton. I'm a fifth-generation Pittsburgher. I grew up in Penn Hills, and I wear a lot of hats. So the hat that's relevant where we met is I'm the workforce director for Pittsburgh Public Theater. Mm-hmm. I head up our workforce initiatives, one of them being a workforce development program called CreatePA. And essentially what that is aiming to do is keep brilliantly talented people home in Pittsburgh. And there isn't a how-to guide on how to enter the crew workforce when it comes to theater or really any productions happening in general. But this is a way for us to make sure that people aren't green when they enter a set, whether it's theater or film. And we crossed paths for the sound training last year at this point. October. Time is flying.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't even remember when it was.
But the second training was called Working as a Working Artist. That was hosted here at the theater to, again, give creative people the how-to on financial planning, budgeting, because they don't teach us any of that stuff. But I myself, I'm a visual artist. I've done art ever since I could blink, I always say. And I also serve as the vice chair of the Democratic Party here in Allegheny County. So needless to say, it's been a very busy 2 weeks for me, but all good.
Well, I'm actually I'm glad that you brought up that you've been an artist ever since you could blink, because that was something that I took note of whenever you had said that during the Q&A, and I thought that was like the coolest way to describe your kind of journey as an artist. So could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that it's ever since you could blink? Because I love the visual aspect of that.
Yeah. So I'm an only child. I'm really grateful to have parents who just threw everything at me to see what stuck, and everything stuck. That's why I wear so many hats. But both of them are creative. Mm-hmm. So I always had exposure to art supplies. And I just remember tearing up paper, opening up a highlighter, smelling it, being so enamored
That's
by
so relatable.
Right. And I grew up in the 90s, so we had really like fruit smelling markers and stuff like that. But I just remember always being drawn to it. I would draw Nickelodeon characters, different cartoon characters, and whether it was doing dance, doing band, or doing visual art, the arts were always part of my life. It is, I think, my calling, and I didn't know it was my calling. It wasn't until I went to the University of Pittsburgh for undergrad that I was like, all right, I got to narrow this down. I like so many things. I like the brain. Maybe I want to study psychology. I like history. I also like art. I don't want to give this up. So I majored in psychology, minored in art. When I graduated from Pitt, I ended up moving to Boston because I thought I wanted to be a scientist when I grew up. I studied psychology. I said, okay, maybe I need more research experience before pursuing a PhD program in neuroscience. So I ended up working at Boston Children's Hospital under Harvard researchers. It was a culture shock because I come from blue-collar Pittsburgh. I grew up in a working-class family, but I was the only person who looked like me in the entire vicinity. And so again, art was screaming my name every time I came home from a stressful work day, and I found myself painting civil rights legends and freedom fighters. We're talking today on August 2nd, which is James Baldwin's birthday, and he was a major activist in his own right through his writings and his affiliation with civil rights legends. And so I painted him, I painted Malcolm X, I painted people who just reminded me to keep my eye on the prize. And that was my introduction into portraiture. Mm-hmm. So I would paint these people, especially as a history nerd, and I would just share it on social media and be like, look at what I did, y'all. And people would be like, you gonna sell this as a print? I'm like, okay, maybe. So then I ended up making an Etsy shop and selling these pieces. But not only was it a way for me to support myself, support my family, it was a way for me to educate the masses about these incredible people that we don't learn about in school. And so then as time went on, I could not let art go. It just evolved into a way for me to reclaim our history, our humanity especially. That's my philosophy as an artist, but especially as someone who has been super politically engaged, community engaged. It's been a platform for me to raise up different social issues happening. Mm-hmm. So what evolved from being almost a form of therapy for me has become a way to just amplify my culture, educate people, but then hopefully activate them to be an agent of change themselves. So that's really my journey as an artist in an elevator spiel.
I think we made it to the floor too.
Yes, we did.
So with that, where along the way there did you decide that you wanted to, like with CreatePA, start trying to help other smaller artists, like kind of elevate themselves with giving them the knowledge of how to kind of break into whatever part of the field they wanted to get into that they might not necessarily be able to find like in school or even in a university where they're getting a degree for it?
So me getting to the public and becoming the workforce director was organic. When I came back home to Pittsburgh in 2018, I always have to give like the bird's eye perspective before I answer your question so people understand.
It's okay, I did the same thing.
I came back home to get my master's in social work. I said I wanted to be a scientist, but I remember saying, what is a graduate program in social justice? And Pitt School of Social Work came up. And I knew, again, my calling was to help people. So fast forward, got my master's degree, ended up becoming the president of the Young Democrats of Allegheny County, ended up working in different organizations here in Pittsburgh that were predominantly focused on helping people. I did maternal health research at the Jewish Healthcare Foundation. I then ended up serving in Mayor Gainey's administration as the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Manager. But then again, art was screaming my name. And I felt like I had to pivot. I felt like I needed to be closer to people on the ground and actually see the change that I wanted to create. And so I remember reaching out to Shonda McDill, who is the managing director here at the Public Theater, and I just said, the arts keep calling my name. I want to be more, I want to feel the impact. Where in Pittsburgh can I go? And she said, we're actually hiring for a workforce director.
Look at that.
Look at that. And so I looked at the job description, and it was just everything that encompasses me as someone who wants to effectuate change in general, who wants to keep people home in Pittsburgh, because I had to leave Pittsburgh at one point. I moved to Boston. That was at a point in time where I felt like there was nothing here for me, that the city wasn't really checking for me. And, you know, we all have our journeys. If you choose to leave Pittsburgh, that's wonderful. That's part of your journey. But it shouldn't be because you feel like your opportunity is limited here. And so with this initiative at large, the goal is just to help people understand what their opportunity is, because we're so siloed in this town. There are a lot of people doing incredible things, and sometimes we just don't know about it because there aren't enough platforms and avenues out there for people to come together as a collective. They do happen, but I wish it were a little bit more frequent, to the point that that's our culture as Pittsburgh. Yeah. So, you know, there's kind of that personal lived experience of, I'm a creative person, I wish I didn't feel like an uphill battle. And so I feel like I'm able to serve what I wish I had coming up in Pittsburgh through CreatePA. And I get to work with people who get to spread their wisdom to the next generation of creatives, whether it's working in wardrobe, or doing set design, or literally becoming an accountant, because all of those things are part of the creative process, believe it or not. So that's how my journey to CreatePA came to be, but it wasn't a linear process.
So beyond CreatePA, how do you think? What do you think the process is for Pittsburgh, where it's currently, you said, very siloed? It's very hard for creative people to meet other creative people who aren't, like if they're an art student, it's hard for them to meet someone who isn't an art student. What do you think the process is beyond doing workshops and beyond doing that sort of thing to break down those silos and to make it more of one community space?
Yeah, you know what, I think Pittsburgh is an interesting city because we are very heavy with institutions. We have philanthropic institutions, we have universities, etc. And I think the pandemic really lifted the veil on where all the gaps are. We need a community beyond anything during the pandemic, but then I think there was also this realization of how important the arts are in nourishing us. And then it's just going to require a collective effort across institutions that have money, that have means, that have venues to collectively shift our culture and our systems. And for example, the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, they launched this program called Hive, where monthly they bring together creatives to just come together and talk and network. There's no mass agenda. It's just to bring people together who wouldn't otherwise know exist, right? Another example of an institution is, again, I'm a Pitt alumna, and preserving relationships, working relationships with people is so necessary in this town, because you have no idea what doors people can open for you if you just risk and bet on yourself. And I kept in touch with basically everyone I interfaced with through the School of Social Work. And I am now the artist in residence for the Frederick Honors College at the University of Pittsburgh. Okay. Because I have found people there who believe in me and also are in lockstep with shifting our collective culture to be more inclusive, to be a place where everybody can thrive. And so my artist residency brings students of all disciplines together. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer or a pre-med or studio arts. The whole purpose is to get them thinking about how they're agents of social change, and it's called Democracy in Focus. So I bring people in who are advocates for any issue per month. People get to listen to them. I have a one-on-one conversation just as we're doing right now, and then they go off to different stations and create their own pieces of art based off of what they heard. Okay. And so that's just another way to get students, young people thinking, okay, I'm a pre-med student, I'm not really artistic. It's not about that. It's just to bring you together with your fellow students, because that's what I experienced as a Pitt student, coming together, whether we're organizing for Fight for 15 or Black Lives Matter. I just want other students to understand that euphoric feeling of not feeling alone in the pursuit of social justice. That's a piece of art. That's a form of art, and that's a way that institutions can uplift those who are trying to make this city a better place. I think we have all the tools at our disposal. It's just a matter of using it.
Well, I'm glad, actually. I think it shows that we have probably a pretty similar philosophy on what art kind of is for people. So maybe we can elaborate on it a little more. How do you see, because I think most people look at art as it's just art, it's just paintings, it's just sculptures, it's just, things that you can see with your eyes. But I mean, art is, at least in my eyes, just it's a process of revealing these truths that are throughout whatever sector of society you're looking at. Yeah. And it can expose like the beauty of each thing and to kind of show the humanity behind each one of those. So could you elaborate a little bit more on what your personal kind of view on art is overarchingly?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you just said. I feel like art is such a platform to have us see ourselves. And I was just asked the other day, when you want someone to look at your art, what do you want them to feel? What do you want them to walk away with? And simply put, I want them to see themselves. Especially as someone who, again, is on the front lines of trying to save our democracy or ring the alarm on different social issues. I feel like art, it's akin to that phrase, a photo can speak 1,000 words. Some of us might not have the language to talk about name an issue, environmental justice, reproductive justice, racial justice, all of these things. It might feel overwhelming or complex, but if you see a piece of art, it starts to stir something in you. For me, that's why I do portraiture too, because you're seeing another human. Yeah. And my whole value as an artist is centered around a Belle Hooks quote. And if you don't know, Belle Hooks was a Black feminist. She was a social critic and a writer. And she said, the function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It's to imagine what's possible.
I like that. That is good.
It's like art, this piece of paper, this piece of canvas, it could be 3D, whatever it is. This object can open up a window of opportunity for us all. And we see different pieces of art that has stood the test of time, right? Like Rosie the Riveter.
Thousands of years.
Okay, sometimes. Exactly. The Statue of Liberty, right? That's a piece of art. So that's what I feel like my role as an artist is, and the role of art in general. Of course, it's subjective based off of what the artist wants, because as a Black artist, if I paint this water bottle, someone may be like, oh, well, they're trying to have a political statement here. And it's like, I just wanted to paint that bottle of water. So I know with a lot of artists who represent marginalized communities, there's that tug of, okay, is this just a political statement, or is this just a rose? But for me, I wholeheartedly embrace and accept the role of being an artist activist.
Yeah.
That's where I feel comfortable. That's where I feel it's my calling. And I want someone in the year 3008 to look at my piece of art and be like, okay, that happened. Yeah.
I think that is an important kind of disconnection that you brought it up with the water bottle, and it was something that Andy Warhol kind of made a joke out of with the Campbell soup cans, where it's just like, what can we call art? And at that point, I think what people feel like is because art sometimes is hard to understand because the thing that it's trying to explain is so deep and has so much stuff to it that they feel as though art can only serve a purpose if it is serving a purpose, and it's not just, and its purpose isn't just to just be there. So with that, let me think where the question even comes from here. But where do you think that line can be drawn between something like activist art and just art? So where like if we're looking at a picture of like a water bottle, maybe a way to ask this would be, how would you paint a picture of a water bottle?
You know what? That's so interesting. I think that again speaks to the power of art, because you could have 5 people in a room looking at that painting and they have 5 different interpretations of it. And
none of them are correct or incorrect.
That's right. I think that's the magic of it. People always ask me, can you teach this class to teach this technique of, and I struggle with that because I'm like, I feel like art is so boundless. That's the point of it. I can teach you, cross-hatching and how to mix X, Y, and Z colors, but I feel like the beauty of it is you get to be free. So even if the artists themselves didn't intentionally say, all right, this piece is going to speak about climate change and how we litter, how it can end up on a table and then end up on Fifth Avenue. Someone might look at it and be like, they're trying to talk about climate change and how this can end up being litter. right? And so I think kind of that evolution of interpretation is the power behind it. So I guess that's how I would answer that question.
I think it's interesting saying about how, someone could ask you to teach a class on something and you could perfectly explain to them, this is how you cross hatch, this is how you oil paint, this is how you, and maybe that also, I've had this feeling for a while where like that idea of like it's something that needs to be taught, and I think it comes from it being like, you're in school and it's an art class and it's a class or it's a lesson or there's a teacher. And I think with that, I don't know where the realization of that will lead people, but I think it's important for people to realize that sometimes the most interesting art was made by someone who didn't know what they were doing. They just picked up something and started doing it.
Right.
I mean, like Basquiat, he used, I think, like 2 or 3 books as source material for his thing, and he just exploded into this, this thing of just creative force. And, it was so quick in the terms of his revolution that he was a part of, but at the same time you look at him and you're like, where did this come from?
And I think that also kind of speaks to how deeply ingrained classism can be in our society, because it's like, unless you have the degree, unless you have the training, you're not legitimate as whatever. And I think about people that we looked up to throughout history, and they didn't have formal training, or maybe they didn't have a high school diploma, and yet they created the most profound pieces of writing, literature, visual art, whatever. And you point to it as a standard. I mean, August Wilson is an example of that. I don't think he had a degree. And yet we still reference his works to this day. So I think, again, art challenges us to think more clearly about the possibility, and it can be a viable career path too. I think, again, we have this dichotomy of like, oh, art's only for a wealthy and few at auctions somewhere. But people are shunned early if they decide they want to do art. Like, oh, you can't make any money from that. Oh, you can't. When really, we needed it in our most vulnerable time in modern history during the pandemic.
Yeah. I talked about that a little bit on the last podcast episode that I did, where people have this tendency to kind of turn everything that they do into something that needs to be, they input something and then it outputs money back to them. It always is like everything needs commodified in some way. And I think with art that's dangerous, and I mean I know you agree with that too, where that's a dangerous notion to think that this whole field that is just a pure expression of someone's thoughts needs to be something that is structured and commodified, and it needs to be gatekept to people who know how to do it in like the by the books kind of way. And it is kind of amusing when you think of it, like you said. You look at, I don't know, probably 9 out of 10 of anyone who meant anything to history, and most of the time they were the person that society didn't like. They were the one who, was the martyr, or they were the one who was part of the smaller class, the minority group. And so it's amusing that they can be, that society, I had this thought, that society is creating, oh my gosh, my brain completely went blank, is trying to tell you that you need to do this thing properly, to be a proper artist. You need to be able to do all these techniques. And then, the people who actually are the ones who last and are the ones who they teach you how to be a good artist are the ones who at that time would have been respected, and most times were shunned and sometimes killed. And those end up being the people who get taught back to them. Actually, it's funny, we were talking about Hozier, the artist, right before this podcast. He has this great song on his newest album. It's called Butcher Tongue. And he's an Irish activist, so he speaks a lot on that kind of thing. But the whole point of that song is that the world is built on kind of these layers of people who the butcher tongue is the voice that was cut out then. And the one lyric from the song is, the butcher tongue still sings beneath the ground. And I love that lyric. I mean, that I think is one of the greatest expressions of what art can be.
Yeah.
It's something that keeps turning the wheel of society, even whenever society tried to push it out of the clockwork whenever it was there. And I don't know. I don't know if there is a question that can be made from that, or if it's just like that's just something that
Just drop the mic.
Just drop the mic. I'll pick it up and drop it. But yeah, I don't know. That's something that I wish I could word better, and that I could explain better. But I mean, I know you feel that very much, and because that's your whole work as an artist, is being that butcher tongue who keeps singing beneath the ground. You'll bring attention to those people no matter how long it is that
That's right. I mean, I see art almost serving as a time capsule in a way. That, like I said earlier, I would want someone centuries from now to see my piece about Roe versus Wade and understand, why is this woman looking so distressed? Why is she trying to fight back the hands of local government that are trying to come after her body? And I hope centuries from now that's not the same issue that they're fighting. This shouldn't even be an issue that we're fighting right now. And so if someone sees that piece, like, God, that was in 2022 that was overturned? What? Yeah. We're so far beyond now. Or, and so again, it's like art forces you to see what's almost like a mirror, but then also it lifts a veil on what we try to sweep under the rug. So I think that's what you're trying to communicate, that it's just, you're forced to reckon with it. And I will happily accept that task.
It's a big task. It's very much like the Atlas holding up
For sure.
Any person who takes that, especially the activism role in art, is doing that. I mean, something that does lead into, though, that I wanted to ask, because I remember you bringing it up at the workshop, was that your kind of artistic career has been a journey of fighting back against the notions that people had about you. So we've already talked about that, I mean, a lot with kind of minority groups as a whole, segregated groups as a whole, that kind of thing. But for you individually, what were those kind of stops on the map that are things that you're still fighting against whenever you're making your art?
I mean, this can be answered so many ways, but like you said, overarchingly, my goal as an artist is to reclaim our humanity, our narratives, our stories, because in the last century, especially when you think of like the Jim Crow period and how quote unquote blackness was portrayed as less than human. And I think of artists from the Harlem Renaissance and the Black arts movement who their whole goal was to preserve and uplift our dignity, to visually be able to convey that humanity. And so that's how I see it as an artist and also personally. But I would say, again, there's books out here, there's articles, there could be classes, but there is no sort of definitive guide or roadmap into being a successful artist, because you might hit certain markers. You get this many followers on social media, or, you sell this much. But I don't think there's enough of a conversation about holistically what it means to be an artist. Right now, I'm being an artist because I get to talk with groups of people who are listening to this about what it means to be an artist. Or me organizing workshops, that's me being an artist. Me having work on exhibit right now at August Wilson's house in the Hill District, that's me being an artist. And so, again, me being an agitator as an artist is me putting out what my beliefs are, the beliefs of a collective, the beliefs of those who've tried to shift this society forward, and with the hope that more people can be exposed to it, with the hope that more people can be educated by it. And so, that's me trying to push back against what this grand misconception of what an artist is. I did have training at Pitt, but, when you think of the word artist, what do you imagine? What do you imagine? Michelangelo, Picasso?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good question, because I mean, if someone were to ask me that, like, honestly, I don't know who I would imagine if you were, because like now obviously I'm going to think of someone like that because of that, but I don't know who I would imagine when you say an artist, because I think definitely in my last couple years of being just kind of trying to engross myself more and more in art, in music, in literature, has been trying to break down kind of those preconceived. So like
That's
whenever
right.
I think of an artist, it's not just you think of the Last Supper painting, you don't just
Right.
think of the David, even though those are wonderful, beautiful pieces of art that speak in their own volumes. But I don't know. I mean, because an artist is, it's anyone who's making movement somewhere.
That's
I
right.
mean, so whether it's the person who's fixing the bridge on the highway, I mean
That's right.
that's its own kind of art, or a heart surgeon, that's definitely an art. I mean, because if you do one wrong brush stroke there,
That's it, right.
That's the end of that. Yeah, so I don't know what the kind of summarizing. I think that's something that I want to accomplish with this podcast in general, and talking specifically to the artists, because that's one of the things, local business owners, artists, that kind of thing. Like maybe by the end of this, maybe that's when I'll know when this podcast can be over, whenever I can finally conclusively tell somebody like what I think art is, because Rick Rubin, he's a musical producer. He did like Red Hot Chili Peppers, things like that. He wrote this book that is on my shelf that I still need to read, The Creative Act. And his whole purpose in writing that book was just to, I mean, because he's a producer, but he doesn't do anything with the actual sound design of it. He is trying to create an atmosphere so that the band members can express what they want to express, and they're not being restricted by studio time or by location. And it's funny because people look at him and they're like, what does he really do? Why is he so rich? And it's like, well, listen to the music that gets made listen to the Red Hot Chili Peppers before he started working with them, and then after. Like, you can hear the difference. And it's these people who understand that there's something more than just the fundamental structure of things. It's more than what they teach you in school. It's more than, and it's the ones who are comfortable enough to say, I don't think that's right. And they're right. I mean, because it's not right. And that's where you get social movements from, and that's where you get revolutions from. It's from people who say, I don't think this is right. And that in itself is its own art movement.
There you go. You just summarized it. You did it.
No, I have to stop the podcast now. This is the last episode. I'm only 4 in. I think that does bring us, though. It's crazy. I just looked at the clock and it's already been like 30 minutes or something. And I was like, oh, okay. I thought it was like 20 maybe. So I think that does actually lead us very well into the last question. I asked this to every guest, but I started to realize as I was asking it to people that more what it was doing was kind of summarizing all of the things that we had talked about throughout the episode. But I think putting it in this specific way, I always love to hear what people say from it. So I guess I ask a variant of this to everyone, but I believe that someone's creative output into the world is going to affect them as much as they affect that output. So how has your work affected your life, and how has it shaped you into who you are now? And how has the culmination of all of your experiences allowed you to understand the person who originally felt that passion to jump into art and the social field?
Wow, that's a heck of a question.
I know I have to end with a haymaker.
Yeah. Well, I think it just affirms my purpose. And I didn't have the language for that. Of course, when I was picking up those orange highlighters and being like, why does it smell like this? Or when I was sitting in Frick Fine Arts at the University of Pittsburgh, or even when I made my first Etsy page. But I think now I realize being an artist, being a social agitator, being a politico, all of those things can coexist at the same time. And, to bring it full circle about James Baldwin, he said, the place in which all fit will not exist until I create it. And so I feel like to be in a free society, that's self-determination. And I think that's the beauty of an artist too. You can create your own self-determination and help others see theirs as well.
Wow. That was a great episode. I'm not going to try to leave this with too many words, but these sorts of conversations, these sorts of artists are why we need to protect our form. That's all I have to say. Thanks, guys. Catch you in the next episode.